Incentive.
Incentive. Something that encourages you to do something. For example, there is no incentive for people to save fuel. Incident. Something that happens, especially something unusual or unpleasant. For example, his bad behavior was just an isolated incident.
Index.
Index. A list of names or topics that are referred to in a book, etc., usually arranged at the end of a book in alphabetical order or listed in a separate file or book. For example, look it up in the index.
Indictment. A sign that a system, society, etc. is very bad or very wrong. For example, the poverty in our cities is a damning indictment of modern society.
Indulge. To allow yourself to have or do something that you like, especially something that is considered bad for you. For example, indulge in something.
Inevitable.
Inevitable. That you cannot avoid or prevent. For example, it was an inevitable consequence of the decision.
Infer.
Infer. To reach an opinion or decide that something is true on the basis of information that is available. For example, infer something from something.
Insertion. The act of putting something inside something else, a thing that is put inside something else. For example, an examination is carried out before the insertion of the tube.
Insight.
Insight. An understanding of what something is like. For example, there are many valuable insights in her book.
Intended.
Intended. That you are trying to achieve or reach. For example, the intended purpose.
Intent. What you intend to do. For example, she denies possessing the drug with intent to supply.
Intention.
Intention. What you intend or plan to do, your aim. For example, intention of doing something.
Interfere. To get involved in and try to influence a situation that should not really involve you, in a way that annoys other people. For example, I wish my mother would stop interfering and let me make my own decisions.
Interference. The act of getting involved in and trying to influence a situation that should not really involve you, in a way that annoys other people. For example, interference in something.
Invent. To produce or design something that has not existed before. For example, who invented the steam engine?
Invention.
Invention. A thing or an idea that has been invented. For example, fax machines were a wonderful invention at the time.
Invisible. That cannot be seen. For example, a wizard who could make himself invisible.
Island.
Island. A piece of land that is completely surrounded by water. For example, a small/tiny island.
Jacket.
Jacket. A piece of clothing worn on the top half of the body over a shirt, etc. that has arms and fastens down the front, a short, light coat. For example, a leather/denim/tweed jacket.
Jeans.
Jeans. Trousers made of denim equals a type of strong cotton. For example, I always wear jeans.
Jewelry. Objects such as rings and necklaces that people wear as decoration. For example, silver/gold jewelry.
Just. Only. For example, there is just one method that might work.
Label.
Label. To fix a label on something or write information on something. For example, label something.
Lady. A word used to mean woman that some people, especially older people, consider is more polite. For example, there's a lady waiting to see you.
Lake. A large area of water that is surrounded by land. For example, in a lake.
Last. Happening or coming after all other similar things or people. For example, we caught the last bus home.
Laugh. The sound you make when you think that something is funny or silly. For example, to give a laugh. Leaflet. A printed sheet of paper or a few printed pages that are given free to advertise or give information about something. For example, we picked up a few leaflets on local places of interest. Leak. To allow liquid or gas to get in or out through a small hole. For example, a leaking pipe. Let. Used for making suggestions or as a polite way of telling people what you want them to do. For example, shall we check it again? Yes.
Level.
Level. To make something flat or smooth. For example, level something out.
Lie. To be or put yourself in a flat position so that you are not standing or sitting. For example, lie plus adverb prep. Lie. To be or put yourself in a flat position so that you are not standing or sitting. For example, lie plus adverb prep.
Light.
Light. Pale in color. For example, he's got light blue eyes.
Like. The things that you like. For example, we all have different likes and dislikes.
Litter.
Litter. Small pieces of rubbish such as paper, cans, and bottles that people have left lying in a public place. For example, there will be fines for people who drop litter.
Long-standing. That has existed or lasted for a long time. For example, a long-standing relationship.
Loss. The state of no longer having something or as much of something, the process that leads to this. For example, I want to report the loss of a package.
Loudly. In a way that makes a lot of noise. For example, she screamed as loudly as she could.
Luck. Good things that happen to you by chance, not because of your own efforts or abilities. For example, with any luck.
Magnetic. Behaving like a magnet, that can be attracted by a magnet. For example, magnetic materials.
Mainstream. Considered normal because it reflects what is done or accepted by most people. For example, mainstream culture/politics. Mainstream. Considered normal because it reflects what is done or accepted by most people. For example, mainstream culture/politics.
Mass. Affecting or involving a large number of people or things. For example, the world faces the tremendous problem of mass unemployment.
Material.
Material. Connected with money, possessions, etc. rather than with the needs of the mind or spirit. For example, material possessions/wealth.
Maximum.
Maximum. The greatest amount, size, speed, etc. that is possible, recorded or allowed. For example, a maximum of 30 children in a class.
May. Used to say that something is possible. For example, that may or may not be true.
Maybe.
Maybe. Used when you are not certain that something will happen or that something is true or is a correct number. For example, maybe he'll come.
Meaning.
Meaning. The thing or idea that a sound, word, sign, etc. represents. For example, what's the meaning of this word?
Memorial. A statue, stone, etc. that is built in order to remind people of an important past event or of a famous person who has died. For example, a war memorial equals in memory of soldiers who died in a war.
Merely. Used meaning only or simply to emphasize a fact or something that you are saying. For example, it is not merely a job.
Minimum.
Minimum. The smallest that is possible or allowed, extremely small. For example, a minimum charge/price.
Minimum.
Minimum. The smallest that is possible or allowed, extremely small. For example, a minimum charge/price.
Mirror.
Mirror. A piece of special flat glass that reflects images, so that you can see yourself when you look in it. For example, in the mirror.
Misleading.
Misleading. Giving the wrong idea or impression and making you believe something that is not true. For example, misleading information/advertisements.
Missile. A weapon that is sent through the air and that explodes when it hits the thing that it is aimed at. For example, nuclear missiles.
Mission.
Mission. That cannot exist or be done, not possible. For example, almost a virtually or nearly impossible.
Mistake.
Mistake. An action or an opinion that is not correct, or that produces a result that you did not want. For example, it's easy to make a mistake. Mix. A combination of different people or things. For example, it's a school with a good social and ethnic mix of children.
Mob. A large crowd of people, especially one that may become violent or cause trouble. For example, an angry or unruly mob.